Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. I want to welcome you to the OSPI Truancy 101 webinar. We have a lot of information to share with you today, and we want you to know that we will be recording this session and sharing the slides in the chat. So if you don't catch something or you need to hop off to help a student, just know that you will be able to come back to this content. And we will also provide a resource guide in the chat that will have links that you can access during this presentation. The objectives of this session is to understand the intent of Washington's compulsory attendance and truancy laws, have a basic understanding of state law and OSPI rules, understand the truancy process, what actually happens, know where to turn next for more information and resources. So some tips for participating in the Zoom webinar. If you have questions for OSPI and the presenters, we ask that you please submit your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We will try our best to answer all the questions, but we do have a lot of content today and there is a lot of attendees. Your questions are very important to us, so we will try our best to answer all, but if we do not get to them, we will follow up with more resources. Chat engagement is encouraged among each other, and the recording will be available by next week. We are offering clock hours for this webinar. Please use the PD enroller link. It should be dropped in the chat to register for clock hours. I want to start by grounding ourselves in OSPI's vision, mission, and values. Our vision is all students prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. Our mission is to transform K-12 education to a system that is centered on closing opportunity gaps and is characterized by high expectations for all students and educators. We achieve this by developing equity-based policies and supports that empower educators, families, and communities. OSPI's values is to ensure equity, collaboration and service, achieve excellence through continuous improvement, and focus on the whole child. Particularly relevant to all of our work in education, but especially as we think about attendance and re-engagement work through this work, educational equity is at the center of this work. And what we mean by that is equity goes beyond equality. It requires education leaders to examine the ways current policies and practices result in disparate outcomes for our students of color, students living in poverty, students receiving special education and English learner services, students who identify as LGBTQ+ and highly mobile student populations. This requires education leaders to develop an understanding of historical context, engage students, families, and community representatives as partners in decision-making, and actively dismantle systemic barriers, replacing them with policies and practices that ensure all students have access to the instruction and support they need to succeed in our schools. I'm going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Jenna Millette. I am Attendance and Re-engagement Program Specialist at OSPI.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Chrissy Johnson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Attendance and Engagement.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Pearson Walker. I am with the Educational Service District 112, the Southwest Washington region. I'm the Attendance and Re-engagement Manager.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Teresa McMahon, and I am a juvenile probation counselor that works with Truancy down here at the Clark County Juvenile Court.
Thank you. Go back to our PowerPoint slides. And like I said before, we will be recording today and the recording will be available by next week. We will follow up with an email to share the recording, and we will also post it on the OSPI webpage. We are going to launch a poll to start us off. Give me 1 second. So we want to get a feel of who is with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Please say what position you are in, what grade band do you work with the most, And how familiar are you with this topic? I will give you all a couple, maybe less than a minute to answer this poll. All right, looks like we have almost everyone who has answered the poll. Go ahead and share the results. Looks like we have some building administrators, attendance clerks, district office, counselors, ESD staff here. A lot of folks who work with secondary and both elementary and secondary. And it looks like majority are somewhat familiar with this topic, and it's why we are here today to start the school year off. Thank you for participating in the poll. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Chrissy.
I wanted to spend just a little bit of time before we get into the nitty-gritty, sharing a little bit about how OSPI and our partners approach the work of attendance and truancy. I'm sharing with you our guiding principles. First, we know that attendance and engagement are foundational to student learning. We know that absences tell us when a student has not accessed instruction. We know that absences are an early warning indicator that can tell us a number of things. Absences can reflect inequities that are either caused or perpetuated by our systems. And they can be an early warning indicator when a student and family might need more support. We have this rich opportunity to get curious about why students aren't attending, to truly support them to engage in school. And our students and families are our best partners to understand the barriers to attendance. Schools and districts have a lot of opportunities for prevention and intervention before involving the court. And we will talk about what that can look like today. Over the last several years, Washington has really worked on building up our multi-tiered systems of support. What you see here is Washington's MTSS framework, and attendance is a critical part of this framework. We see attendance as being a critical part of teaming and leadership. Attendance is an essential data point when making decisions about student well-being and learning. Family, student, and community engagement is essential as part of addressing attendance and engagement. We can utilize a continuum of supports that are based on evidence-based practices to address students' attendance and engagement. One of the things that we really wanted to share with you today is that, and I know that you know this in your daily work, absenteeism is an indicator of so many different underlying causes. It could be that students are physically ill. It could be that they have some mental health challenges like anxiety or depression. Students could have other responsibilities outside of school, like caring for siblings or joining their families to participate in agricultural work. Many students really struggle with transportation issues. They might not be feeling welcome or feel like they belong at school or have an adult that really cares about them or has expressed that care to them at school. They might have fallen behind in classes and they're feeling like it's a huge lift to catch up. They might be experiencing an unsafe or challenging home environment. And so, as you know, it really depends on the student and the context and the community and the school and their classes. So it really, if we take away one thing from today's time is what can we do to truly understand what's underlying students' absences? And to take a moment just to differentiate terms, we use a lot of these sometimes interchangeably. Today, we're really focusing on some of the legal requirements around truancy, but we also talk about chronic absence. So there's a lot of research out there that shows that students missing 10% of their school days for any reason, whether it's excused or unexcused, have impacts on their long-term learning. And truancy, as defined in our state, is when students meet these specific thresholds of unexcused absences. And these thresholds here of 7 in a month or 15 in a year are just the threshold for when a truancy petition is filed. But as we'll talk about in a little bit here, there are several other interventions and steps that that should be taking place earlier than that. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we wanted to really share with you the background and intent of our state's compulsory attendance laws, which colloquially are referred to as the Becca Bill. Historically, in Washington and across the country, truancy has been responded to in a punitive manner. We've made significant effort and progress over the last several years to shift our approach to attendance and truancy to one of support. And so I'm going to take a moment just to read this to you. This is a purpose that I am summarizing for you, but you can also find this in the intent from the legislature. The purpose of the Becca law is to provide a safety net for youth and to prevent students from disengaging from school. It is not intended to punish students for past absences. The compulsory attendance laws are a tool for early detection and intervention for youth at risk of disengaging. The goal is to provide intentional supports for youth to re-engage them with their education, address barriers to attendance, and increase access to educational opportunities. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Teresa McMahon. Teresa.
Thank you, Chrissy. I always like to put a face with a name. And so this is Rebecca Hedman, when the bill is named after. She started skipping school back in middle school, and that was at a time when schools didn't notify parents of the absences, and parents weren't required to excuse absences with the school. And during that time, she became involved in dangerous activities. She became addicted to drugs and alcohol and was a victim of commercial sexual exploitation and ended up brutally murdered at the age of 13. During this time, Rebecca's parents had gone to the juvenile court to try to get help, but because she hadn't committed any crimes, there was nothing that the court could do. And so Rebecca's parents lobbied the legislature to create that safety net for other youth like Rebecca. And schools were found to be a real critical intervention opportunity, a really early intervention opportunity. And we're asked to communicate with parents about students' absences and take steps to re-engage youth in their education. So there's a few other tools that are also with the Becca Bill, and that is the CHINS petition and the at-risk youth petition. And I just wanted to touch briefly on these to let you know that they are resources that could be helpful for your students or your families. And these are usually accessed through your local juvenile court. Today, we're just focusing on the truancy portion of the Becca law. So schools and districts are really required now to take some really early intervention steps to supporting youth long before filing petitions. I just wanted to point out at one point in time, Washington State had the highest rate of incarcerating youth for status offenses, which are activities that are only wrong because of the youth's age, such as running away or truancy. Incarcerating students historically for not attending school has led to that school to prison pipeline that you probably heard about. And I can personally tell you as a court employee that the few of the students that were placed into detention when we were doing that earlier on really did not re-engage school when they were released. The re-engagement takes place at the school and community level where there are concerned adults that are working to establish those relationships with the students. Next. And this, I believe I'm going to be handing back to Chrissy to be talking about some of the attendance laws.
Thank you, Teresa. I first want to start, before we get into what districts are required to do, I want to remind us that education is a basic constitutional right for all children in Washington. So that underpins all of the work that we do. There are specific requirements and responsibilities of school districts to enroll students and provide access to education. Our compulsory attendance laws hone in on responsibilities of parents and guardians, as well as children who have a legal responsibility to enroll and attend. Now, they have the option to attend public, private, or home-based instruction, or as we have typically referred to it as homeschool, when students are between the ages of 8 and 18. So if a student is 8 until they are 18, and there are some minor exceptions. I will take a moment to say that we are providing a summary of a robust set of laws. And so please don't take this webinar as the end-all be-all list of laws that impact your responsibilities or attendance and truancy. And so when I say with some exceptions, there's more detail that can be found in the statute itself. And we've linked that, we have linked that here. And we've also will provide some summaries of the legal responsibilities. This is an overview that we are going to be going through step by step. Essentially, these are the different steps after the different thresholds that school districts are required to take in the law. So without reading through all of this right now, it is our roadmap for the next few minutes here. And before we get into that, I just want to acknowledge that for some of you, if this is new, that this can be overwhelming. And we know that not everyone has all of these systems in place. And we know that that can create a lot of either learning tension or leadership tension. We know that what you are experiencing on the ground, in your building, in your district, can be really different than what we are presenting here. The law is the law, and it is written by legislators, and sometimes it doesn't fit our reality perfectly. We just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge that you are all here to learn and that we're all in the process of building systems. So thank you for holding that with us. So as we go through specific steps based on specific thresholds of absences, want to share with you that taking the specific action or the right action on the right day is not the most important thing. However, building and taking a supportive, early and consistent approach is. Okay, so starting with the first requirement, schools and districts are required to send a letter at the beginning of the year. And this letter has a number of different pieces that it is to include. And some of those things are the benefits of regular school attendance, the school's expectations regarding attendance, who are the people that in the school that a parent should contact, what are the resources available to assist students and parents, that's not a word, parents. And this letter is to go out at the beginning of the year. And this letter is, as outlined in the law, to be communicated in a language that the parent is fluent. We, OSPI, provide a template letter that you can edit to your context, and it is translated in a number of different languages. The next requirement I'd like to share with you is that after each single absence, that is unexcused. Districts are to contact the parent or guardian in writing or by telephone in a language the parent is fluent, to notify them that their student has not attended school or provided a valid reason for them to be gone. I am sharing 2 resources for you on this. One is a phone call script that can be adapted for your robocall system, or if you have live people making phone calls, as does happen in some places. That is a resource for you. And then we also have recently posted a number of attendance letter samples for the different thresholds on our website. And we have chosen those letters because they reflect a really supportive tone. They don't have pages and pages of text. They're pretty accessible. So we encourage you to check those out. And I think with that, I wanted to get folks talking in the chat. Thank you for getting that fixed, Jenna. I'm wondering if folks can take a second to reflect and then share in the chat. In your context, in your experience, what is the difference between an excused and an unexcused absence? And why might a student's absence not get excused? I'm going to give you a moment. And while you're doing that, I see Caleb's question in the chat. Does the letter need to be mailed, or does email parent square tool work? Absolutely. If the legislation does not specify that it has to be a hard copy letter that gets sent out. So your typical or common tools that you use to communicate with parents is a good way to communicate this information to parents. Lisa Markison, we will, the letters are on there. We will find the link and make sure to include it in our resources when we send it out to the translated templates. I see some responses to what's the difference between excused and unexcused. Parent does not call in. And someone has said, oh, let's see. One of the things you can do is toggle so that you're chatting to everyone instead of just the panelists. I see someone has said that the difference between is how well the student and family can navigate the district systems. So ability to communicate is a big theme that I'm seeing. Extended vacation. So if a district has a policy or a school has a procedure of not excusing when they go on extended vacations. Yeah. Thank you all for taking a moment to think about this and to put your responses in the chat. I hope as you continue thinking about this, we're keeping those in mind, and how do we and what are the necessary differentiations between responding to excused absences and unexcused absences. With that, I will hand it over to Claire.
All right, thank you, Chrissy. So again, there are all these required steps before you file the petition. And like Chrissy said earlier, just a reminder that the tasks are more important than the timeline. So focusing on completing all the steps, because as you'll hear, as I go over all these specific steps, it's all about communication and connection. So after the 3rd unexcused absence, this is the time when you're going to attempt a conference with the parent or guardian and the student. The goal of this initial conference is to identify the barriers happening with the family and the student. And it's also a chance to connect with the parent and the student. A successful approach will be to build a positive connection and build trust. and seek to understand the underlying reasons for the absences. And you want to work together, work with the family and the student to increase that student's attendance and engagement. So listed on this slide are a couple resources that can help you with these initial conversations. So at between 2 and 7 unexcused absences, this is when you will be attempting to assess the students. So middle school and high school students, you will need to utilize a screening tool to identify the various reasons for the students' absences. And that may be several different things that you're gonna wanna learn about, like, is it transportation? Are they behind in school? Do they have things, barriers at home? You can utilize the WARNS or other screening tool. And OSPI and ESD 101 have created a guidance on various screeners that you can use. So you can use any of these screening tools or assessments, and the options are listed within the resources here on this slide. The RCW linked here and in the chat also has several interventions to consider. The key to the assessment is to identify the root cause of the absences. Completing the assessment will help guide you and your team on what support services and interventions will be needed to improve the students' attendance and engagement. And you have to remember the iceberg, because you do see there's students that are skipping school, but there's all those layers that are underneath the iceberg that are keeping that student from being successful. And again, it is an indicator of some bigger issues going on for that student. The steps within the process, the conference, assessment, outreach, they're all opportunities to understand your students' barriers and their root cause of their absences. So next, this is an important step in the process. So between that 2 and 7 unexcused absences, if the student does have an IEP or 504, you will need to convene the IEP or 504 team. At this time, the team will consider the reasons for the absences and make any necessary adjustments. And for students that may have a disability, but they do not have an IEP or 504, they should be referred to the district's child find process. Parents and guardians can be notified of their rights to request the evaluation at no cost to the student or to the family. And time must be allowed for a plan to be completed, and if they are eligible, or for the evaluation. And if they are eligible for this, then there has to be time to put a plan in place to address the needs of the student. All right, so after the 7 unexcused absence, you must enter into an attendance agreement or refer student to your community engagement board, and you can then file that petition. So entering in the agreement with the student, listed on the slides are some example plans. The agreement outlines commitments, not only for the student and the parent, but also for the school. This should not focus, the plan should not focus on compliance, like you must do this for the student. It should be a tool that can commemorate the mutual support goals and commitments made by all parties, so between the student, parent, and school staff. We have examples linked here, and please consider changing language away from the idea of a contract. It can be really helpful and more encouraging to look at it as instead a mutual agreement with a name like Student Success Plan as an example. So again, after the 7th unexcused absence, this would be a good time to refer your student to your community engagement board. The board is a great tier 3 intervention. As you can see with everything I've listed, there were attempts at conferencing, individual meetings with the student where you're completing an assessment. So you should have identified barriers before you reach this point. So again, the community engagement board is more of a tier 3 intervention. The CEBs can be somewhat intensive. I think a lot of people do get overwhelmed with this idea, and it does require a lot of effort, and it is definitely, I encourage to team with partners in your school and your community to put these together. So this is a point when you're going to be convening school staff You could partner with your local juvenile court or various community volunteers. The goal is to identify barriers and build a connection with struggling students. And you're building that connection between the community, school, local resources, and supports. And here we do have the link to the setting up your community engagement board modules. So at this point, you're ready to file that petition. I'm going to quickly say, I'll make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's and checking all the boxes. So here, as you file the petition, first tip is please contact your local county court to make sure that you have the specific paperwork and you understand the specific process for your county. The petition is not a criminal action, but it is a civil action. The petition will be stayed, so that's like placing it on a hold. Some counties have set timelines for their stay, so that's something you're going to want to check in with your local jurisdiction. So the stay allows all parties, so the student, their family, and the school, to work together to improve attendance. The school district will work with the court to determine when to lift that stay, and that may result with a hearing in front of a judge at that point. And we're going to discuss that, the more specifics about that later in this presentation.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate it. So we see lots of questions in the Q&A and the chat. Just wanted to take a pause because this might feel overwhelming. And in all likelihood, you already have systems in place that can support this work. We're going to share a couple of examples about how local districts and schools have taken and have designed their process and combined some of the steps. So what does it look like in reality? This example was shared with us of a medium-sized district on the eastern part of the state. And in this example, the teacher is the first point of contact when a student reaches a certain threshold of absences. The front office sends the letters. Building administrators are the ones that have the parent conference, and it's by phone. And then the school counselor is the staff member that administers the assessment. In this case, it's either the warns or the gain. Those two are described in the guidance that Claire mentioned earlier. If the absences continue, the counselor and the principal do a home visit. And then if the absences continue after that, they meet in person to do an attendance contract. And if the absences continue after that, the petition is filed with the court and it's stayed, which means it's put on hold, and the student is referred to a community engagement board.
All right, I'm going to discuss an example of a larger district where, obviously there's going to be several elementary schools. There's a few middle schools and they've got a few high schools, and you've got one liaison that's based at district office that's filing the petition. We've seen that it's been very helpful to have teams set up at the school. For example, they would have 2 or 3 people that are the point people at the school. It could be a graduation coach, student advocate. It's almost always the attendance clerk working together where they're completing all of the steps. They're providing information to the students, scheduling those conferences. They are giving out the assessment. They put all this work together and then they refer it to the district liaison to complete the next steps in the process to actually file the petition. And so that seems to be really helpful with our larger districts, is to establish these point teams at each of their schools to help support such a large task. And again, that's a great team to have because they're at the school instead of the district level. So they get to know the students at the school and communicate with the parents, and they're usually familiar with them as well. So that's been really helpful. Some of our larger districts, obviously, they'll partner with our local ESDs to be able to, when it comes to the community engagement board. So they use services and supports outside of their district to help them with some of the components of the process. All right, so here are some takeaways. I mean, we're giving you guys a lot of information, but we definitely want to encourage that it is a team effort. Like I was talking about with that large district example, it takes a team to be able to support that one liaison that works at, at the large district level. And again, even a small district, it helps to have a team support you with this work. So these steps, again, the day threshold is not as important as the steps, because I know a lot of court commissioners, they'll be looking at the completion or attempts of the steps. That's more important than if you did it at the 3rd absence or the 15th absence. Schools should make every effort to go through the process. All these steps will help you learn about what your students need and what the families that attend your school, what they need and what supports that they need. So it's important to follow through with that communication, to also build a bridge and build relationships with the students and families within your school district. Again, key is to document all the steps. So even if you're making that phone call and they're not answering the phone or you left a voicemail, jot that down. Keep track of all of the communication you've attempted, the letters that you've sent out, what you've learned at the assessment. Even if you sent the assessment out and it wasn't completed, take note of the day that you tried to reach that student. So OSPI guidance, all of the required steps must have been attempted before filing a truancy petition. And Teresa always says that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Is that what you say, Teresa? So that's what you have to remember. You've got to make sure you document. All right, so we're going to have another chat discussion. And this is something we want you to start thinking about. You may not have a team, but if you can write in the chat, if you've already have a team, who do you partner with in your district? What are the supports that you have? And if you don't have a team, who can you enlist? Where can you start? So if you could please share that in the chat.
All right, I see some responses coming in. I saw someone say, I am the team. We know that this is really common, and we want you to know that we know that you can't do this by yourself. So take a glance at some of the other ideas that are coming up in the chat. We've got family liaisons, we've got teachers, counselors, assistant principal, knowing everybody has different size staff on the school, different capacity. Maybe it's one other person that you can enlist. I see district liaisons as partners, embedding attendance with the MTSS efforts, native liaison, your McKinney-Vento liaison. For foster youth, really thinking about who are the students in the foster youth's life that can be included on these teams. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. With that, Teresa, can you walk us through the truancy process once that petition is filed?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Here we go. So one of the things I kind of wanted to reiterate from what Claire was saying is coming from the court level, it is really important to make sure it's documented in the petition, in any affidavits that you have, as well as it doesn't matter if you're at 15 or 20 or 30 absences. It's more important that you've really tried to work to engage that student. And while the processes may differ slightly across the state, counties do require that the school do their part prior to filing the civil petition. And as I get talked about, you guys have done a lot of the work. You've provided the prevention and intervention. And you've done a lot of the work before it comes to either the juvenile court The petition is stayed, and I know in our county, then they go to the CEB or other community supports. In other counties, there might be a CEB before the stay. There might be one during the stay. It's just, even with the courts, we're kind of doing things a little differently and at different points, but we're all trying to do the same work. And most of the courts do have some sort of tiered interventions that happen during that process. While they're with the stay. If it gets to the point where you have to lift the stay and ask the court for findings or truancy or intervention order, that's just your court hearing. And that's where you can definitely enlist the aid of whoever the court contact is to be part of your team also. And I just wanted to put on here that the detention isn't on the table for truancy, and a petition does not directly lead to seeing a judge or commissioner, because I know I've heard that several times from schools that they really don't want their kids to get in trouble. They just want them to get their help. So we'll go to the next one. So, like I said, court engagement looks different across the state, but they are all really wanting to work with the schools in their district to get the students attending and graduate. Some of the things that courts can provide is different level of authority when you at the schools have really feel like you've exhausted all your efforts. Sometimes that court piece is a little bit of an eye-opener for students and families. Courts also have knowledge of different community resources that are available to at-risk teens. They generally work with the students that are getting in trouble. These kids aren't getting in trouble, but if we can do some early intervention, maybe we can keep them from getting in trouble as well. There can be a case manager to support or engage the students as well. Some courts have informational workshops that students can attend, either provided by the court or by a community partner. Some of them have separate attendance boards that students and families are invited to. There can be referrals from the court to other community supports, and it just allows for a little bit more of a formalized process. And I know that there's some or many courts that make direct contact with students and families during this time, either through phones or letters or even through home visits. I know there's several courts that will do home visits on the students. Next. So kind of to wrap up the reasons as to why to file a petition, because sometimes I've heard, from schools, I don't know why, I don't understand, it's a lot of work. We talked about a lot of the things that can happen with the court is involved. Filing a petition with the court can provide access to those supports, allow families to see that school is important to the community, and perhaps mandate assessments that families or students may be resistant to. But courts can't get involved unless you ask them to, and that petition is your request to the court for assistance. And it's the best way to get that process started. And like we've said several times, that petition is stayed, so it doesn't directly go to the judge. But I really encourage you to contact your local court to see how they can help you. Because I know many of them are really ready, willing, and able to help.
Thank you, Teresa. I wanted to jump in and add something here. We can't ignore the punitive role that courts have played historically in Washington state. And we've taken some great strides to shift that and to change courts' approach. We can no longer place students in juvenile detention. And so we are here from OSPI and from an ESD and from a county court that have really worked really hard to shift that approach. And what we can't do is speak definitively about what it looks like in your county or in your district. And so if you're still feeling hesitant about like, we would never, like feeling like if we file a petition, it's going to be a punitive process, I encourage you to maybe with an open mind, reach out to your court. If you don't know the process or supports that they provide, just check it out. Again, this is as a last resort. There are a number of early intervention opportunities for schools and districts to take before ever getting to filing a petition. And yeah, so I just wanted to share that as well. We wanted to touch base on one topic that we are really trying to raise awareness around right now, and that is that OSPI has recently published some updated guidance on withdrawing students. The myth is that schools and districts have to withdraw students after 20 days of absences. That is a myth. OSPI does not require that districts withdraw students either for apportionment or for CEDARS reporting, either after 4 days in September or after 20 days in the other months of the school year. There's updated guidance. We will link to that, or that link can be found in the supporting documentation. And we did a webinar back in last March that highlighted how a couple of school districts have approached meeting the data reporting requirements for apportionment. So you're not claiming those students for funding, but you don't have to withdraw them. And how to report them to CEDARS. So I encourage you to check out those two pieces of guidance. I encourage you to share this with your team, with your superintendent, with your CEDARS administrators. We're really trying to get a big push. This is a really critical time right now when students may have disengaged or families have lost communication, and for schools and districts to withdraw students at the beginning of the school year, and then these students do not show up on absence reports. So that absence data then doesn't give us the information that we rely on it to give us. They may be there in your community, and they've just been withdrawn from school. So that is what I wanted to say about the withdrawing guidance. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jenna in just one moment. I'm going to bring us back to the purpose of the Becca Law. I shared this at the beginning to reground us. The purpose of the Becca Law is to provide a safety net to keep youth safe and prevent students from disengaging from school. It's not intended to punish students for past absences. I'll hand it over to Jenna. Nope, sorry. I guess I have one more thing that I wanted to say. I know there's a number of questions. We have enough time to go through some of the questions here in a little bit. But if you walk away from this webinar and are feeling a little confused about where to start, we recommend that you start with these two things. One, looking at how you're communicating about attendance. Can you look at your letters? When was the last time they were updated? Do they communicate in an accessible manner? Are they written at a 6th grade reading level? Do you have them translated? And do they really lean into like, this is what's going to happen when your student is absent, or does it communicate a tone of support? So that's one place to start. Another place to start is building your team. Who are the people that you can enlist to support you? You may feel alone right now, but you don't have to be alone, because attendance is everyone's job. And with that, I do believe that I get to be done talking and hand it over to Jen.
Thank you, Chrissy. So we do have some additional resources. We have the attendance and truancy frequently asked questions that is on our webpage that you can access, as well on the resource guide and the slides. And then we also have a contact list of all 9 ESD attendance and re-engagement coordinators. This is also on the OSPI webpage. Webinar resources will be posted on the OSPI attendance policies and guidance webpage in the next coming days. I highly recommend to spend some time exploring other resources on this webpage as well. And all school districts are required to designate and identify a person or persons to coordinate school district efforts to address excessive absenteeism and truancy to OSPI. So please remember to register your district truancy liaison. You can verify and update your district truancy liaison information on the OSPI's district truancy liaison website. And some upcoming events. This week we have Attendance Works is kicking off their fall e-learning series. This is a 3-part training series to promote attendance using a team approach. Registration is limited, so we ask that if you do register to please attend all 3 sessions, which will be on Thursdays, September 14th, 21st, and the 28th, or 28th from 3:30 to 5. And then we are also hosting a district truancy liaison peer learning network. This will be held on Tuesday, September 19th at 2 p.m. We will also share this information in our upcoming OSPI attendance newsletter. So please make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. And you can contact us. We have an attendance inbox. It's attendance@k12.wa.us. Chrissy and myself manage this email. And then you can also reach out to your ESD attendance coordinators.
All right. With that, there are a number of questions in the Q&A that we have some time here to respond to. So with that, I think I will stop sharing and we can shift over to responding some of the to some of the questions. And then we'll wrap up probably around 2 o'clock today. If you need to take off, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to Jenna and Claire and Teresa. Really appreciate you all being here today and sharing your expertise. I don't think we'll take any live questions today, but if you have a question, if you've raised your hand, if you could please put it in the Q&A, and then we will be offering more opportunities like office hours to answer some of these questions. All right, so panelists, do you see questions in there that we can respond to? I think a number of people have asked about the letters. I'll just reiterate, I said earlier that the letters do not need to be mailed hard copy. They can be sent through Parent Square or other communication tool that you use with your families.
I see one of the first questions. It was about counting the total absences. If they're missing the first period every day for several days, that can't be total to equal full days. But typically they look at, for a secondary students, if it's over half of the day. So if it's 7 periods, if they're missing like 4 or so periods, then that could count as a full day.
Thank you, Claire. Specifically for truancy purposes, those period level absences cannot be added up to count towards a truancy petition. I think I saw a question about when does a parent need to be notified, like what qualifies as the one unexcused absence. And our interpretation, OSPI's interpretation, is that when a student misses any portion of school to notify the parent. So even if they miss 1 period, that the parent would be notified.
I do see a question, Teresa, if you want to take this one. It's the CHINS or at-risk youth petition, if you see that question.
Yeah, I saw that. And CHINS and at-risk youth can be used to help with school, but generally there's a few more requirements that the student has to meet to qualify for those. You can go to the I think it's the Washington Court website, and it has some of that paperwork so you can see what those qualifications are. But your juvenile court could answer that for you better. And then I saw another question about the legal requirements for students 18 and older. At age 18, they're considered adults. So this does not apply to them after that. It's you just have that sort of responsibility as having them as your student to figure out what's going on.
And I do believe 18-year-olds can sign themselves out. That was another question. Or excuse themselves.
I think typically what I see is school districts having a specific form that parents can fill out, giving their students permission to, so that it's an official agreement between the parent and school district. What if they're always sick? That's a great question. I think I'll answer, then I'd love to hear Claire and Teresa jump in. I would talk to the school nurse. If you have one, they would be my first point of contact when a parent or student is reporting that a student is always sick. That would be my first response. Claire or Teresa?
I think also having conferencing with the parent, and because if they're always sick, and Teresa, you probably see that too, or you're working with the families and you just encourage them to communicate, because there might be other options. I mean, especially considering whatever the ailment is or physical needs they may have, you can maybe run through all the different alternative options or look at accommodating or accommodation for the student depending on their issue.
And I think my answer to that might depend upon the student's age. If you're looking at elementary, I would be kind of curious, you know, what is the sickness? Are they saying they have a tummy ache? Are they not feeling well? Because that could be a sign of some sort of anxiety based, you know, causing that tummy ache. I don't want to go to school. Well, the way not to go to school is tell mommy I got a tummy ache. If you're looking at, you know, middle or high school, that still could be the same question, but it also could be, is there something where, you know, a 504 plan is needed? Is there truly, I mean, we have diabetes, we have asthma, do we have illnesses that are truly keeping them out of school? But that's where asking those questions in a really, you know, kind, curious way will help you determine the answer to that.
Thank you both. Maybe we can take a couple more. There's a couple of questions about establishing thresholds for excessive excused absences. One of the things we didn't highlight today, but there is a requirement in the law for schools to have a parent conference for elementary school students that have 5 or more excused absences. And in addition to that, so the purpose of that conference is to understand the underlying causes of the absences and help to make a plan to reduce the absences. We have guidance in several places for school districts to consider when they are establishing thresholds, which they are statutorily allowed to do. One is in our attendance and truancy FAQ, which we have included in the document that has all the links in it. And then the other is in the mental health absences guidance that we published last year. We'll make sure to send that out to folks. So without going into too much detail about it right now, districts have the authority to establish a district policy wherein similar responses or interventions can be put in place when a student reaches a certain threshold of excused absences. And indeed, we encourage that. OSPI has put out guidance that we recommend that school districts do not require medical documentation at certain thresholds for all students that meet that threshold. And again, it's not that medical documentation would never be appropriate, but that it be considered on a case-by-case basis and is not the intervention right, it's not the first thing that is required, just because of the equity challenges in getting to a doctor and getting a doctor's note. So again, that can be found in the mental health absence guidance. And we will share that link out. Let's take maybe one more question, Teresa and Claire. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit. I've seen a couple of questions about like when a CEB is required or not required. Wondering if you can respond to that.
Yeah, I saw a few questions about community engagement boards. And there was one where they were asking if you have to have one. It's unless it's changed, it's 300 students or more is when, so if you are a district with under 300 students, it is not a requirement as you're filing the petition. And I know that, like we were saying earlier, to complete the steps before you file the petition, that's definitely the key. Because you will be having conferencing and assessments. And if, correct me if I'm wrong, Teresa, they have to, if they can show that they have these interventions in place, if they don't have an actual community engagement board. I believe some jurisdictions will, and I'm not your jurisdiction, you're going to have to go with your specific county jurisdiction, but you might be able to complete the petition portion of it. And just a quick, we've ran a lot of community engagement boards. I think there's a lot of pressure that you feel around the concepts of a community engagement boards, but really having some established agreements and finding a team at your school or throughout the district. You can get started with staff that are just really supportive of the student. They're familiar with the student, and put a little team together to run a community engagement board. You can have three people on that team. It could be your FCRC coordinator, a school nurse, you know, if you have a parent volunteer that's interested. It's not as complicated to set up as it does seem. So I just want to share that it is. And if you review the modules, it does show you that it isn't a very complicated process to add in to your the truancy process you already have.
And the modules you're talking about are the ESD 112 website that we shared earlier that has a lot of great CEB resources on it. I just want to clarify, the law states that a school district can have a community engagement board before filing a petition, but they must have it after filing the petition. So your court is the resource that you want to connect with about what that process would look like relative to engaging the court in the petition.
And
so we see districts doing it both ways. Sorry, Teresa.
That's okay. I was gonna say there's a question in there about, do court personnel participate in CEBs? And in some counties, the answer is yes. In some counties, the court can run the CEBs. In some counties, they can just sit on as a volunteer. But yeah, like Chrissy was saying, you reach that threshold, you can either hold a CEB or file a petition, is the way it's stated in the statute. But yes, with most courts, if you file the petition and stay it, it's usually stayed and referred to a community engagement board.
I will also say, I see a question in there about are schools required to have a truancy board, and what if our school doesn't have one? The community engagement board is required in law. And I will say, building on what Claire said, it doesn't have to be a panel of the same 11 people that you pull together. It could be, here are a couple of people and this one community resource that we know knows the student and might be able to help this particular student. So there's that. And if you have not already done parent conferences, if you don't have structures in place and people assigned and roles assigned for those early interventions, pulling together and focusing on building your community engagement board, to me, is not the best place to start, right? Because that is so intensive. So building up those early interventions and processes around parent conferences and communication and providing some interventions and doing the screeners, that when you're building out your process, if you're just starting on this, thinking of MTSS, right? What are the easier low lift things that we can do to prevent students from ever getting to some of the more intensive interventions that we have, like a community engagement board or a court petition?
And again, like Teresa said too, partnering with your local juvenile court and reviewing your MOUs and establishing those relationships can really help. make it less overwhelming.
And also, I think Jenna posted the attendance and re-engagement coordinators for your local ESD, and they could be a good resource for you and have some ideas. I mean, local ESDs have student assistant professionals, they have educational advocates, and they could be a good resource for you as well.
And just one last note about boards, I saw a question about the purpose of it, and really, again, like being a tool as a tier 3 intervention, but it's also a place to show students that the community and the supports are around them. So it's another voice too. Sometimes I'll sit on a board, and just having it take place outside of the district sometimes can be helpful, so you can have kind of a neutral area to have those deeper conversations. And then a lot of the volunteers can be resources for you too as a district, and it kind of deepens your partnership as a school with your community and your local partners. So it's kind of a win-win.
Okay, one last question. Jimmy's asking about what are some roles from the schools and community partners that can be typically included on a CEB? Claire, you mentioned a couple of good school
I just
roles.
think of, we've had such a variety of volunteers. I've had real estate agents, farmers, veterans will come and sit on the board, and it's just interesting to see the different perspective of from our community volunteers. But some really helpful volunteers have definitely included parent involvement, especially for the parents on the board, to have another parent sit there and say, I experienced this whole thing. We had the same issue with my kids. Local resources are extremely helpful. I do love having our juvenile court partners, because I mean, I love it when Teresa's on our board, because something comes up and she can name off all these connections and resources, and it's just a great opportunity to also get the knowledge from your volunteers. So definitely getting local community resources and partners, mental health services, local agencies. I know our housing authority was pretty involved in one of our school districts volunteer boards, because a lot of their students attended this local schools, and so they would be actively involved. And so I think, but again, we've had the variety of volunteers sit on the boards.
I would just say y'all have friends in the community. Your kids' coach, you know, your neighbor. Everybody has a friend in the community. I was talking with one of our elected officials down here the other day, because he used to be on one of our boards, and he's like, well, the only reason I went out there is because my friend was running it and they asked me to be on the board. So we all have friends. And yes, we're talking about the training. That's really important to make sure that the people that are on there have a good understanding of trauma and kids and education. But sometimes just having a grandma on there too is good also, I think.
Not only that, I think it's really important that we consider the needs of the student and the race and ethnicity, the culture of the student, so that when they walk into a room, they can find a person that is there that is more likely to be able to connect with them, because it can be such a vulnerable space. So again, it's not important to have 15 people in the room. It's important to have the right people in the room that will be able to connect and support the student.
Yeah, because it helps you also perspective too, to give you a perspective of some of the different challenges, their unique concerns that the student and family may have.
All right, there are more questions, and I know that we have not gotten to all of them, but with so many folks still here, we will be following up with the webinar recording with the links, and we will provide another opportunity to do some office hours, knowing that folks still have more questions. So again, thank you, Claire, Teresa, Jenna. Thank you all for making time to be here today. We really appreciate the work that you're doing in supporting student attendance, and please reach out to us, and hope that the rest of the beginning of the school year goes well for you all.